watched back in the Attitude Era, when Stone Cold
Mhm.
and The Rock, and I was like, all right, that makes sense. I mean, that was a gigantic blow up in the wrestling world. And then I also see people who, once they discover something like New Japan, they're like, oh, what is
Mhm.
this? Because I
Mhm.
know pro wrestling and it's this, but this is still pro wrestling and it's something completely different that,
Yeah.
they don't care. It looks like they don't care how their neck is or whatever. They get dropped on their head. They hit real hard. Like you will see, broken blood vessels in the chest. And it's like,
Mhm.
what the fuck am I watching right now?
Yeah. Yeah. And that was pretty much my first impressions of it, and still my impressions of it now. Like watching matches and stuff. Like I still am able to I like just I guess empathize would be like a softer version of the word that I'm looking for, but really feel like what is going on and what the journey is, like being taken on that journey of like of a fight and of combat, and just by watching people in a really good match. That's kind of how I feel, and that's kind of the most amazing part about it for me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that makes sense. Who did you train with?
So I've trained with a number of people. I initially started my wrestling training with WOW Women of Wrestling.
Okay.
So Selena Majors, Malaya Hosaka were my original trainers. And I still work with WOW Women of Wrestling. So they very much gave me my start in the business, and taught me the ropes literally. And but then I was able to just on my journeys of moving around and stuff, I was able to train at 5-Star Pro Wrestling in North Carolina for quite some time, and learning under Cozone there, which was fantastic. And then I've also trained under Josh Barnett. He was really able to hone in like my martial arts, skill set, and, put it in the context of like, professional wrestling, with his style. And that was amazing too. So yeah, I've, sort of been training kind of all over the place, but, those I would credit, like those 3 people would be the 3 people that I credit my majority of my training to.
I mean, that's not a bad list either, because, Josh Barnett is, not only was he a great, MMA fighter, but he has turned that into being a great pro wrestler. And he is just, what he's done with Bloodsport is one of the best things about the week of WrestleMania. And we saw it again this year. We had the return of Kota Ibushi, and then also, Speedball was doing his greatness throughout the entire weekend, or week really, I guess now. But Bloodsport is always kind of one of those things that people look forward to and will get to whatever city it's in early enough to go see it, because it is, especially if you are a fan of not only pro wrestling but MMA, it is, I would say it's closest to Pancrase than if anybody knows what Pancrase is. Like, that's probably the closest thing, because it is it's a work shoot. So, like, as much as they're not really wanting to hurt each other, they are going to work a little more snug than they probably would normally.
Well, sorry, continue.
No, go ahead. You actually competed there, so.
Yeah, I was gonna say, the aspect of like the physicality of Bloodsport is very real. It's not, like you said, it is quote unquote work shoot, but we are going in there and striking as if we were in a fight. The only difference is the outcome may or may not be determined. Not to get too behind the curtain or anything, but like,
no, it's fine.
it is, it is like every strike is real, every kick is real, like we are, not holding back in that realm. And that is definitely the thing that I find sets it apart from, anything else you might see, in that sort of, context. But yeah, I absolutely love it. And I do think it is like, the closest thing that you'll get to, the greatness of like Pancrase and UWFI and all that, that sort of genre of, that style fighting, and very blessed and grateful to have been a part of some of the events in the past, for sure.
Thank you for correcting me on that, because I've unfortunately still never seen it live as many times as I've been to WrestleMania now. But I'm definitely going to try to make it next year to Philly. I don't know where GCW is going to be set up, but I wouldn't be surprised if it also was a place where an ECW used to take place. But I could be wrong. I have no idea.
Yeah, it's definitely a highlight of Mania Week for sure. Hopefully, keeps around and keeps going and growing and stuff for sure.
Yeah, and even so much so that I remember them doing another one in Ohio. I think it was last year sometime, or maybe the year before that. I mean, obviously it was around the time where people were starting to be able to be in front of, or performers were able to be in front of fans again, and so the world was starting to open up more, and so I remember them having like that kind of collective weekend in Ohio, and Bloodsport was there, and I think that was one of Jon Moxley's first bouts outside of WWE right before AEW, were in between that time frame.
Yeah. I think you might be correct. Yeah, that was a good one for sure.
So when did you get into jiu-jitsu then?
I started training jiu-jitsu, I want to say like 15 years ago.
Okay.
So, quite some time ago, I started training in Sydney, Australia, and around the time that I started, it was very much still, MMA was still kind of seen as like that. There was a good portion of the public that saw MMA as human cockfighting, and it was barbaric, and all the artwork for MMA events all had those chain link fences, and like it was all very broy at that point, and it didn't really it's not as corporate. It wasn't as corporate as it's presented now. So the jiu-jitsu school that I started at was like the first Brazilian jiu-jitsu school that opened up in Australia, and so it was it's still very old school in a lot of the ways, like the training regimens and stuff like that, and and then, there were not that many girls that were training at the time either, like maybe one or two, like in every kind of school in each state. There was a very small handful of women that trained. So it was it was a really great experience, because I really feel like it just not to sound like cliched or anything, but it really kind of toughened me up to be put through that system way back when. I'm not saying it's any easier now, but I know like the sport has evolved a lot since that time, and I was able to train had started my training there, but I was able to do like seminars with like Hoyler Gracie. They would always do regular trips to Australia, so really got my experience from the very direct practitioners of the sport, and it's been like the one constant in my entire life that has never really let me down, so to speak. But it's definitely one of the things that I'm most grateful for, that that's been part of my life.
So when did you get your black belt?
Yeah. I got my black belt right at the beginning of the pandemic, so March 2020.
Okay.
I actually believe it was the day before they announced the official lockdown. So it was a really, so that's why the date stands out so vividly in my brain, because I just remember everyone was like really just nervous and scared to just even be in the gym, because no one knew what was happening. And but I was like, I'd spent like 6 months preparing for the testing of my black belt. I just did the test, and my professor just announced that like within the next week or so, I would be like receiving like my official black belt. So I was like, I didn't even care about the pandemic or whatever. I was like, well, I mean, I did care, but I was like, but I have to get my black belt. Like, they can't shut down gyms now. So I think it was like literally the like March 22nd or something like that. And then it was like the next day they were like, okay, we have to like shut everything down. It was like, if I didn't get at that point, I don't even know when it would have happened, because I ended up like moving out of the state and stuff during the pandemic. So I moved away from the gym, all this crazy stuff. So it was like really momentous for me to get it when I did. But yeah, it was after like, over 10 years of training that I was able to finally achieve that.
That's so awesome. And congratulations. I know that's, not an easy feat to accomplish for people.
Yeah. It's I actually think it's I tell a lot of people that getting a black belt really is the beginning of your jiu-jitsu journey, because you realize how little you really do know getting up to that point. Like everything else is just kind of setting in stone for a lifetime of like learning, and and teaching is a big part of, being a black belt as well, and being able to share the art is a skill that I've had to like really like develop and just, make something for myself, like the way that I like to teach, and the way that I like to share the art, and what I've learned from my professors, and how that's going to be, carried through to new people and stuff like that. Like those kind of things, like I had no concept of prior to becoming a black belt. And so, those are the things that I find are very important to me when, achieving that rank. Like obviously the physical aspect of it is, imperative as well, but, the teaching of it is just as important, I think.
No, that makes sense, because I was actually talking to somebody earlier, and they were saying the same thing. It's like once you get that black belt, then you are it's like you are the least experienced black belt person, and you have to start all over again as a black belt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, pretty much.
So, yeah. Now, how much of it, when it comes to creating a moveset for pro wrestling, how much do you borrow from jiu-jitsu?
It's a great question. And it's a question, an answer that I'm constantly evolving, I think. Because, I'm relatively new to the wrestling side of things compared to like my martial arts experience. It's like, at first I thought it would just be a huge part of what I did in the ring. But the more the more experience I get, sort of in the ring and working, with other people, the more I realize that that it's not like, it's like having a conversation with someone if you're speaking one language and they're speaking the other language, Like if you are just going in there speaking your own language and they don't speak that language, like you're not really communicating, So what I've been trying to do, just with my training recently and just, with my recent matches is like, how do I speak my language in a language that, the other person can understand, but also like everyone can understand. So, what we're doing in the ring is obviously trying to tell a story. And, if you're speaking two different languages, you obviously can't tell that story. So I'm trying to like learn how to incorporate, like, what I know into that world. And, the more that I guess, the more time I spend in the ring, the more I realize that it's like, it's not a matter of like doing a whole crazy flashy moveset. It's like putting in one or two things that will speak to who I am and my style in a way that everyone can understand. That they understand that I'm not doing the same thing as everyone else is doing, but they also understand what I'm trying to achieve in there. So yeah, it's always changing and always evolving, and that's what I also love about it so much. Like, is like I'm constantly learning more about myself. I'm learning more about the art of it, and I'm also learning how to communicate that art in a way, in a way that everyone can absorb, and be entertained by. Ultimately at the end of the day, that's like what we're trying to do. And like I will be the first to admit that, if you ever go to watch a competitive, like, grappling jiu-jitsu tournament, it's probably, unless you, like, truly understand, like, the sport and what's going on, it's probably one of the most boring things you'll ever see. Like, it is truly, like, it can be just mind-numbingly, like, just painful to watch if you don't have an understanding of